Evening, everybody. That's a few folks coming in now. So we'll just, you guys are obviously the prompt ones. Well done. Thank you for that. Obviously, we're still a couple of minutes early yet. So we'll just hold fire, let more people join in, and then we'll kick off just as soon as we can at 7:30 or very, very shortly thereafter. Kind of keen to keep this snappy and on schedule because you've all got, I'm sure, other things to be doing. So bear with us. We'll start properly in a couple of minutes' time. Excellent. There's Gary here. That's the one. That's the one I really wanted to see arriving in the meeting. Hi, Gary.
Hello.
How are we doing?
Not bad, actually. How are you?
Excellent. So, just saying a moment ago, we'll kick off in a couple of minutes. Folks are joining very rapidly now, so we'll kick off in a couple of minutes' time.
Okay, I'm going to see if I can make my presentation work as well just in advance.
I'll need to give you the share screen option. I can do that now, or we can do that later if you wish.
Do you want to do that now as a test?
Yeah, here we go. You should be able to do it now.
Let's see. Share screen. That one.
Yay, that's going to work.
And if I then start slideshow, let's see if that works. What are you seeing?
I'm seeing the kind of the PowerPoint. I'm not the slide presentation, but the kind of the working presentation, if you like.
So you're seeing my left screen then. Does it have the, when you say working presentation?
Well, so I can see your kind of list of slides on the left.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. It's not what I'm seeing. Display settings. Swap presenter view and slideshow. Try that one. Does that work?
Yay, that's the one. Yeah.
Nice one.
That's the one.
Right, so I can't see anybody, just to warn you. So if there's any pulling of faces or comments, I'm not going to see them.
That's possibly just as well. So I think we'll just give it a minute or two more, and then we'll crack on.
Okay. Are you seeing my face at all?
Yeah, I can see you and me, and then a lot of other participants there as just names. So I can see like a set of tiles on the right of my screen with participant names.
Okay.
Hello, everybody.
So who's going to give me some abuse? Adam Rose, I suspect.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure Tom Gibbs is coming or not. I bumped into him yesterday. He was threatening to, and he was going to pretend to be Italian today. I don't know quite what that means.
Oh, okay. No idea what he's on about. I might suddenly turn French if he goes Italian.
Touche.
super domestique Chris Gaisley's here.
Fantastic. Okay, so I think we're just after 7:30, so I'm going to kick off, and folks should be able to join in as they arrive as well. So we'll kick off and get on with this. So the first thing to say is hello, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. Welcome to the second of the ITERA Getting Ready for ITERA sessions. Tom may or may not show up today. I'm not quite sure whether Tom will or not. James is otherwise engaged, and so you've got me, I'm afraid. So between Tom, James and I, as I suspect people generally know, Tom, James and I put the ITERA event together these days. Tom is the course planner. I kind of do all the kind of the boring logistics and venue stuff, and James kind of runs the show and has done with ITERA for many years now, and has built something really quite incredible there. So this session is going to be led by Gary. We'll come back to Gary in a second. A couple of house rules before we begin. If everyone can stay on mute, that would be great. The session is being recorded, and we know, for last time round we did this. We recorded it last time round, and actually I think quite a few people saw the session afterwards as well. So it's quite handy that we've got that recording of it. So if you don't like it, it's being recorded. You're probably better off leaving. Sorry. We're going to aim for a maximum of 60 minutes, keeping it nice and snappy. But there will be time for questions to Gary at the end. Are we able to share the slide deck? I'm sure we probably can as well. That's a good question. So there'll be questions at the end. So if you can drop questions into the chat function, which is the bottom at the button at the bottom center of your screen, we'll try and pick those up at the end of Gary's presentation. So the purpose of these sessions was really to introduce kind of ITERA specifically, but actually expedition adventure racing more generally. It's a bit of a kind of it's a tricky concept. It's, these races are massive and sprawling and rightly a little bit scary for some folks, particularly if you're kind of new to the sport. And the intention here was to provide a bit of information, an opportunity to ask some questions, and for folks who are perhaps new to adventure racing or newish, to feel a bit more comfortable about taking part wherever the race might be. But there's clearly going to be a bit of a bias towards ITERA, because that's kind of that's where our experience lies. However, I'm looking down the participants list. There are definitely some old hands there who are clearly here just to learn some of the secrets. We won't be giving away any course hints today. Even Gary doesn't know those bits. In fact, especially Gary doesn't know those bits. So we'll hand over to Gary. Gary, thank you very much for helping us with this session. Gary is a very, very experienced adventure racer, raced kind of internationally at a very high level, still does. Probably one of the UK's most experienced adventure racers, as I say, racing both UK and internationally, and at a variety of disciplines, everything from the short, sharp, fast stuff up to the multi-day expedition races, which is the kind of thing that we're aiming at talking about today. So without any further ado, Gary, across to you.
Thanks, Paul. David has asked about the slide deck. Probably okay, but just managing expectations, you may not want to see them. But let's carry on. So I hope you can all see my screen. So I've got a picture of Tom, Lucy, Ben and I at the last ITERA, which is a fantastic race. That was just before the race started, all ready and excited to go. And it's actually worth mentioning one thing to note here. We've all put our names on our bibs. So that's one thing to maybe prep before a race when you get your bibs. And the reason for that is when someone, and there will always be someone who loses their bib, you'll be able to identify who's lost their bib at a transition during the race. So just a quick tip there. So this is a rough agenda of what I intend to cover on the left-hand side. And just to clarify, what I'm not going to cover on the right-hand side is any form of detail in terms of fitness training, sleep strategy, nutrition, drink, race strategy. That may come in the other two sessions that Paul and team
Yeah.
have in mind? I don't know.
Yeah, the nutrition one specifically is, I think, is the subject of one of the future sessions. I think the other big area we'll cover is what it's like to take part in one of these as a new team. But I suspect that we'll pick up those other aspects at some point in the future.
Okay, I might touch on a little bit of fitness training then, and leave nutrition to the other ones. Okay, so me, Paul's given me a very nice introduction. So I think I've raced in roughly 15 multi-day international level races all over the world. It started in the UK with James Thurlow's races, of course. My first race was actually in untamed New England in northeastern USA when I lived in Montreal for a year and a half. And then from then, I think I've raced in every continent across the world with the exception of South America. So I've done Portugal World Champs in 2009, Costa Rica World Champs in 2013. I've done 2 races in South Africa already, and I'm going back there next week. Oh, time flies. And also God Zone in 2016. So quite a large variety of races. Wow, lots of dots, far too many. Right, so let's stick with the basics then. So what do you need to consider when you enter a race or consider entering a race? Well, actually, what's at the venue, and how do you get the venue? So we all know that we are to meet in Oban in Scotland. I've never been there. I've no idea what's there from first-hand experience. And to be honest, I hadn't really considered how do I get there. So in terms of what I would do, I looked at all the options. Would I drive? Would I train it? Would I train and bus, or would I fly? And they all have different pros and cons. So for me to drive from a hometown in Cardiff, it's a long way. It's at least 9-hour drive. Whilst it's a long drive, it's got some cons. For example, cost of fuel. But it's easy to carry all your kit in one vessel, and you could potentially share your vehicle with others as well to share costs. But you need to come back, so you don't particularly want to be driving back when you're really tired of having done 5 days of racing. So that's definitely something to consider. Whereas, for example, if you were to fly, you could fly in less time. You can probably get to the venue fairly easily. I think James and the team have offered in the past to potentially collect people from the international airport. Paul's nodding, that's good. And then take people back to the airport to fly off. Now that's probably the preferred option for international teams, but for UK teams, you have far more options available to you. And of course, in this kind of very climate conscious times, I suspect many people will consider what's the most sustainable mode of travel for them also. It's not just a case of time and cost these days. And then, well, so that's one thing to consider because it does impact how you pack your bag and what you bring with you. And then the other consideration is, well, what's at the venue? So for example, I've done a quick Google map in Oban. You've got your typical large stores, your supermarkets, your restaurants, and the like. Whereas if I was to race in, say, Lesotho, as I will be in just over a week's time, there's nothing there. So there's no supermarkets. You have to take all your food with you. There's no bike shops there. So you have to bear all that in mind. However, the organisers for Lesotho, for example, have said when we fly into Joburg, if we can do an online shop in the local supermarket, and they will pick it up for us and give it to us when they pick us up and bus us off to Lesotho from Joburg Airport. So little things like that are worth considering when you're doing a major race. A little bit about the team then. So getting 4 people together is a major achievement in itself, as I've discovered in the last 2 months. So the team and I entered Lesotho Racing Expedition Africa 2 years ago. That's been delayed, of course, by COVID, as was ITERA. And actually getting 4 people to get to the venue has been a major challenge. So for example, Tom has had his passport lost in the passport office. Ben is mega busy with work and house moving. It's just been a nightmare. And we've had, I think, 8 potential changes in terms of getting a team together in the last probably 3 months alone. So we have finally confirmed that we are going to Lesotho next week, which I'm delighted about. And then, okay, what about where do you live in comparison to each other? Well, ideally, you'd all live in the same town or neighborhood, so you can train together, you can meet face-to-face for chats, but most likely scenario is you're all living in different places. So how do you best communicate and plan to do this race? So as we all know from the COVID and pandemic, is we are able to work virtually these days. And I really do promote that you and the other 3 in the team do get together often to discuss various matters. And I've outlined some things here, what I think you should consider in those early discussions. So I think I'll concentrate on the bottom bullet point first, but one of the key things for me is to be transparent, open and honest with each other about what each other's expectations are. I've been in a few teams and seen other teams where one person's expectations is very different from another. So one person might think, I want to be on the podium, and you might have 2 members in the team who are thinking, well, actually, I'm just here to survive and hopefully get to the finish. Having those discussions up front is really important, because what you don't want to have is just a different of expectations halfway through the race, and it is very challenging condition. Because the reality of adventure racing is over 4 or 5 days is you are going to see the best of people, but also see the worst of people. So if you are aware what your kind of best and worst likes are, it's worth revealing those to your team members in advance, because they will come out. If you turn into a vampire when you're really tired, let the others know, so they're forewarned. And then it's worth a discussion as well about a few things in those early discussions, like team roles, for example. So I've raced in a significant number of races now, and everybody wants to have something to do generally in the race. So for example, you generally have 1, 2, possibly 3 navigators, but you might have one person that does navigate. Well, how can they contribute to the team while the other 2 or 3 are navigating? Think about that. Some people don't care. Some people like to sing. Some people want to make sure that the others are eating and drinking. Just kind of think about that and make sure nobody's left out in advance of the race. Navigation is a big one for me. So I think when I started racing in 2006 and 7, I got fitter and fitter, faster and faster. But actually, what happened is we were making far more mistakes because we were going faster, but making more mistakes because our navigation wasn't up to scratch. So understanding who can do what in terms of navigation is really important. So just as an example from my team, Team Endurance Life, is we generally appoint a lead navigator on each leg. And then we have a backup navigator on that leg as well. And we tend to rotate that role around the team, depending on who the team members are, but make it ultra clear who's responsible for navigation. And also the navigators need to be able to relinquish the map and give it up when they're feeling a bit tired. So in addition to navigation, other key skills are kind of mechanical. So things like, can you fix a broken chain? So that is definitely the most likely thing to go wrong on your bike is your chain. So if nobody in your team can fix a chain, then you're quite frankly in deep doo-doo. So it's definitely some skills like that you need to consider when you're discussing with your teammates. And then food nutrition, discuss and share views on this amongst the team. I'm not going to go into any detail now because it's been covered by another presentation. And also what the expectations on sleep are. So for example, one teammate may be expecting to sleep 2 hours a night. Another person in the team might be expecting to sleep 6 to 8 hours each night. I think it's important to kind of consider that and have a chat about that in advance of the race, because people do have different approaches. So I'm just going to briefly touch on fitness then, not in terms of a detailed training plan, but in terms of what I think are the key features of being able to get through to the finish. It's not about what training plan you're on. Ultimately, I think it's literally time on feet. So are your feet and all the soft tissues in your body, ligaments, muscles, tendons, everything, are they used to being on their feet for that length of time? So for example, you might have a 100-kilometer leg as one of the legs in the race. Well, can your body sustain that level of keeping going for that period? And also, in my opinion, the biggest factor in adventure racing, ultra running, is how well does your body cope with descending. The descending is the bit that causes the most damage. So don't just think about distance, think about ascent and descent in your training. Another key one for me is on the bike, bum on saddle, as I call it, similar to time on feet. So have you ridden your bike sufficiently long enough, to get used to that kind of relationship with your saddle, shall I call it? And also, is your back end molded and familiar with the shape of your saddle? And whilst I'm on that note, don't train on one bike with a saddle and then switch bikes at the last minute to another bike and another saddle, because your rear end will not be familiar with that saddle. And then a general weakness amongst British adventure races is kayaking. Generally, it's something we're not very strong on compared to the Aussies and the Kiwis and then maybe the Scandinavians, is kayaking. So if I was to give you one thing to train on before ITERA, is go kayaking, learn a good technique, because what you don't want to be doing is to have bad technique and have shoulders that want to fall off. If your shoulders want to fall off, you have bad technique. And then the other lesson here is, and I learned this from very early stage, where I was training with teammates, and generally what everybody did was they trained their strength, because that's what they felt good at doing. And in their eyes, if, for example, one person was strong at a bike and another one wasn't as strong as bike, they would expect the other person to get stronger on the bike instead of them actually focusing on their weakness and the other person's strength. So bear that in mind. If you're the strongest mountain biker in the team, well, is there really much point in doing a lot more mountain bike training? Maybe it's better to focus a bit more on kayaking or on foot. Okay, so onto the kit then. So in the Adventure Racing World Series, ARWS publish a mandatory kit list as a template. Each of the race directors in the ARWS then take that template and they basically make it specific to the race. And so on the right here is, I think, an extract from the template. And it basically tells you what the minimum kit requirements are. And this should be one area where you focus a little bit of time on and make sure you have all the kit. Do you have it? Is it durable? Is it going to last a 5-day race? I might expand on that a little bit more in a second. So what I generally do with my team is I pull together a spreadsheet. And I basically put a name. So you've got 4 team members. I put one column for each team member, and we'll identify between us who's going to be bringing what. So for all personal kit, we'll have to bring the minimum requirement, of course. But for team kit, we don't all need to bring that. We just need to know who's bringing it. And using this spreadsheet format, I think, is really good. And so our team, heading to Lesotho next week, we had a meeting online a few days ago, went through this, who's got what, who hasn't got anything, and then we need to buy it or borrow it from a friend, for example. And I've been doing that since about 12 years now, so it's a good format. Moving on then to the race format itself. This is also a key method for planning your logistics. So this is the route planner from Expedition Africa Namakwa, I think it was 2018. So it had 8 legs. It tells you what the distance, ascent are, and it gives you an indication of what the time is. And also it gives you an indication of what facilities you get at the start transition of each leg and the end transition of each leg. And there's a number of reasons why I think this is important to look at. So I think, ITERA will be doing something similar. It basically, for example, you need to know what the race discipline is to enable you to pack the right kit for that leg. You need to understand what the duration of it, because that determines what amount of food you need to carry with you and water. And also, when you leave or arrive at transition, what facilities are they providing? So in my opinion, for example, electrical points are useless. Why do they provide electrical points? I never make use of those, but some people might do. However, things like hot water is really good for rehydrating freeze-dried meals. So that's one of the first things we look at, where they're providing hot water. Great, we're going to have a freeze-dried meal of that one. That's 800 to 1,000 calories in our belly, fill our stomach up, but we're going to feel lovely and warm as we leave on to the next leg. Another key one is, do they provide a roof for you to sleep under? So that's also a good call. Do you plan to sleep there or not? Because that may impact where you might put your sleeping bag or not, or your mattress, where your tent might go. Do you carry a tent before and after or not? Do you bothy, for example? Because they're not always mandatory in all races. And also, whilst having a shelter transition is great, there are cons. So if you happen to be arriving at an earlier transition in the race, there's more likely to be a higher number of people there snoring and making a lot of noise. So that's something else to consider as well. And now I'll now move on to the different components of the kit. This is what I've been doing for the last hour before the presentation, taking pictures of my kit, because I thought pictures would be better than words. So ultimately, you need a fairly robust mountain bike. If Warren Bates was on the call now, discussing what bike he'll be going ballistic, for those who remember Warren Bates, hardtail or full sussor question always comes up. And people have different opinions on it, but I've always raced on a hardtail with a decent suspension up front. I also run tubeless tires, running at low pressures, because that gives you a level of comfort as well. So a little bit of suspension there. And I've also got a suspension seat post. So there's a little bit of give in the seat post in the rear. And in my opinion, that has more benefits over a full sussor. And the reason for that, in my opinion, is because there's more bits on a full sussor. Generally, they're heavier and more expensive, more things to go wrong, and generally, you only have one water bottle in a triangle. I like to have 2. You can put this somewhere else, but you lose space. And you've got a whole host of other things. If you're considering tubeless or not, well, tubeless is a no-brainer. I think that I've not had a puncture on tubeless for many years, and I've only had one puncture in the last probably 6 adventure races all over the world. Another thing to consider is alternative hand positions. So you may see on my handlebar, I've actually got bar ends where I can, so I don't have to hold the handlebars in the same place. I can put my hands to the side. It gives you a bit of variety. Stops you from getting wrist pain as you ride long distances. So, for example, in Lesotho coming up, there's a 230-kilometer mountain bike leg. That's probably going to be about a day long, and it just avoids you getting any wrist pain. Some people carry saddlebags for carrying kit in terms of clothing. I mean, not just your tools. I generally don't. I generally carry stuff in my rucksack. Drivetrain. If there's one piece of the bike that you want to be in really good nick before a race, is the drivetrain. So I would generally suggest you having someone who's experienced at bike mechanicry to look at your bike, look at the chain, the front cog and the back cassette to see if it's worn or not. And at the very least, use a chain measuring tool to check the chain. If it's stretched, then you definitely need to change it. And probably run it in for a few weeks in advance to stretch it a bit. If you don't have the ability to service your own bike, I really do recommend you take it to a local bike shop, get it serviced. There's nothing worse than going through halfway through a race and wishing you'd spent £100 on getting your bike serviced. Just put, I think it's worth the investment if you don't have to do it yourself. Map board. Not everybody in the team has to have a map board on the bike. We generally have, the navigators have them, of course, and also the person who might be carrying the control descriptions or the passport. Lights. My tip on lights is I have a preference for cable-free lights on the front. So one on the handlebars and one on my head. I am aware of others that use systems with wires and they may have some trouble with the contacts. So it's up to you. Another tip is to carry a bike computer. So it is legal in adventure racing world to be carrying a non-GPS mounted bike computer. Basically, it counts how many times your wheels rotate and it tells you how far you've gone, and you can use that to measure distance. So if you're going on a very featureless bit of desert, for example, and there's a checkpoint coming up in 5 kilometers, it's a really good way of knowing that you're in the right area. In terms of food carrying capacity, I generally have top 2 bags, one at the front, one at the back. That's probably sufficient to be carrying between, I reckon, 10 hours worth of food of various types. And then the other consideration is, well, how do you carry your water and hydration on the bike? So I generally stick with 2 750ml bottles in the triangle. I've seen people carry them in the rucksacks, which I wouldn't recommend because you're carrying extra weight on your back and effectively on your rear end with a saddle point. I've seen some other people put them in little pouches on the side of the headset as well. Totally up to you. And then, this hasn't quite worked. That slide. It's all gone jiggery pokery. But anyway, so let me just see if I can fix this. End show. Bear with me.
While Gary does that, I've just posted the link there to the kit list that Gary was referring to, the mandatory kit list and the generic kit list that's the part of the AWRS provisions. So there's an ITERA specific version of that sat there on the link. One other thing that I noted as a much less experienced participant than Gary is that I don't normally use a rucksack or carry a particularly heavy rucksack when I'm riding on the bike. I noticed during expedition races that was a really different experience. With a rucksack with even 5 or 6 kilos or something like that in it, full of the kit that you need for the stage that you're on. The difference that made to my comfort on the bike was significant, and I kind of regret not having kind of spent hours on the bike with a rucksack before I went and raced.
Yeah, good points there, Paul. Yeah, so if you're not used to carrying weight on your back when mountain biking, you need to train that way or find an alternative way of carrying your kit. Those of you that have done bike packing or seen others bike packing, they get bike bags that fit within the triangle, but then that introduces other problems like, well, where then do you put your bottles? And I've seen people, maybe more so from Europe, carrying kit in saddlebags, but I tend to find they're quite bouncy on the bike. So I generally go with what Paul said, is go lighter but carry in your rucksack. But everyone's different. But I guess at the end of the day, train the way you intend to carry the method you tend to use in the race. Right, so this is a bike box. Below right is my bike box, which I've probably used for the last 6 years. I've made it myself from Perspex or something. No, it's not Perspex. It's Koru Flute or something.
Is it Corex?
Yeah, it's not quite Corex, but very similar. And it's very durable, actually. So that's been all over the world, probably 6 to 8 times, and it's still standing up. It's Mark 2 or 3 of my box. 3, I think. So I think I've given away one of them. It's thicker than the norm. I think it's 6 mil thick. And I did make some modifications to it. So, for example, this image here of the handles. So to secure the lid down, I put the handle then through the flap. That keeps the flap from bouncing up. What other changes have I done? If you can look at the front, you can see some handholds on the front. So when you're in the airport, you can put one hand on one side, reach over and touch the handle on the other side and lift it up quite easily. If there's 2 of in the airport, one can go on the front, one go on the back. And if a top tip was it's fresh in my head, I think it was Adam Rose, who I saw somewhere. I think he had a little mini skateboard. So he was basically wheeling his bike box around the airport that way. What other features have I got here? Some points to note are things like when you take your wheels off to put them in the bike, make sure you put the bolt through back in, because there's a risk of it getting lost. And if you've got skewers, make sure they're secure. So, for example, I've got a loop in the front of my bike box where I generally put the skewers so they don't come loose, and they come loose and fall through one of the handle holes. And I've reinforced it in various areas as well. And another tip is when you remove your wheels, put brake blocks in your calipers, because they do have a tendency to shut. And when you put your wheels back on and the rotors go back in, they generally don't fit, so that it's a bit tight. Key points there. Few of the points are I generally carry a bike maintenance bag. So either at the end or the start of a bike leg, I will wash everybody's chain in the team using a product, using that chain tool, and then dry it clean and then lube it up, ready for the next leg. We generally take a rear mech. Someone takes a pump, light than that one, but still a pump. Make sure your bike shoes are comfortable and they've been bedded in to not only ride a bike long distances, but also to hiker bikes. There's nothing worse than really stiff mountain bike shoes when you've got a hiker bike coming up. Spare bolts. Another key point is a rear mech hanger. I've been in several races where we've lost a rear mech hanger, but luckily all of us carry our own bespoke one. They're not the type of thing where you can rock up in Oban and say, can I have a rear hanger for my bike, please? You're not going to get one in anytime soon, so make sure you order one in advance. Moving on to paddling then. So I suspect the majority of people on this call, their weakness in terms of 3 disciplines is paddling. I really do promote you to do some paddle training. It is good to have a low weight carbon paddle. I've got a 5-piece one which I bought in Montreal back in 2009, and I'm still using it. I absolutely love it. But you can easily get 2-piece ones which fit into a bag quite easily. And then up until recently, I resisted from buying a backrest with a padded seat. But in the World Champs in Spain back in October, there was a very, very long leg, so I invested in one, and I'll never regret that choice. Foot kit. Paul touched on rucksack size, and this is something that Tom Gibbs actually taught me many moons ago. He said, Gary, if you take a larger rucksack, you will generally carry more kit and therefore more weight. And I've stuck by that ever since then. So I generally only wear a 22-litre rucksack, which is probably more like a 25 to be fair, and I wear it a lot in advance of races. And you can see from the picture there where I'm actually sleeping briefly while Natalie's dragging me along, because the team behind me are catching us up. I've attached the bottles to the front straps using just bungees and the toggles. So that means I can get easy access to the bottles, and they're there in my face to make sure I drink. And I know how much is left, and I know when they need to be filled. Generally take 2 or 3 pairs of shoes, which are well worn in. Waterproofs, I think waterproof coat and trousers are probably the most important bits of kit you will have in an adventure race in the type of environment like ITERA, because when it's pissing with rain and blowing a hoolie, they will keep you warm and dry for the short period that it will be like that. Another high recommendation from me is waterproof socks. Not only do they keep your feet dry-ish, I'm not going to swear they keep your feet dry all the time, but they keep the grit out. So some areas, some ground conditions, you get that nasty mix of grit and mud, and it kind of grind the skin on your feet away. So it's good to have waterproof socks for that. And then poles, sometimes I take them, sometimes I don't. If you do, think about how you're going to carry them. Other things to consider is sleep. So when you're with your 3 teammates planning where we're going to catch sleep in the race, think about where you might want to have your sleeping bag in your bags. That might be quite important. Think about what would you need during the race for personal care. For example, Nathan Farvey said, I think in his book, that the one thing he always wants is a lip balm because he gets really dry lips. Ben Turner, for example, wants toothpaste at hand because he loves to have a clean mouth, and foot powder. So you want to dry your feet out in transition, ready for the next race. That's really important. Another key thing I've learned over the years is everybody's bodies regulate the temperature differently. Some people get really hot quickly, some get really cold quickly. And if everyone was to stop every time they were uncomfortably hot or cold, you'd be stopping all the time, which is really inefficient. So think about a really good temperature regulation system for yourself. For me, it's a short sleeve t-shirt, arm warmers, gilet generally, and then a coat if I need one, a buff and a hat and gloves. And generally that will cope with all different conditions. And things like, think about map bags to keep your bags dry, altimeter to know what height you're at when the temperature, so when the climate's really bad and you can't see anything. Think about how you're going to count paces. I've got toggles on a string, so every 100-meter distance I walk or estimate, I'll pull one toggle up on that, and then you can keep a count of where you're at. And depending on where, if the maps and the passport are waterproof, bring or not bring cellophane to keep it waterproof, because nothing worse than a map that just disintegrates on you. And I think the ones in Lesotho are not waterproof, so we will be taking lots and lots of cellophane. I'm slightly running over time, so I'm going to try and whiz through these. But food and drink wise, I know this is covered elsewhere, but I won't go into the nitty-gritty detail. But what I tend to do when everybody does this differently in my team is I generally pack, those bags you get at airports, which hold your cosmetics. I generally use one of those as a 6-hour bag, and I put roughly 1,200 calories in there. And I used to prepare spreadsheets of all the food I put into each bag, but I've now got to a level where I can actually just guesstimate how much I need for 6 hours. I make sure there's variety in there, make sure there's freeze-dried meals in there. That's a high recommendation for proper food. And electrolytes. So I know I'm a heavy sweater in terms of salt content and also liquid sweat. So I need to drink a lot generally, and also need to replace these salts quite a bit. Otherwise I cramp. And in terms of kit and food packing, so what I generally do is I will prepare one dry bag for each leg. So you should know in advance what legs there are, what discipline they are. So, for example, if you know it's going to be a biking leg, you should put in there, for example, cycle shorts, socks. You may or may not want to put a spare top in, because we generally try and wear the same tops for as long as possible. And you can see the bags are actually quite small in there. So one key thing I've learned is not to give yourself too much choice. For example, don't put in 3 t-shirts in there of different types, because you just take 5 minutes to decide which one you think is the best one. General advice on that. Top right, you can see me and Phil Scarf in Namakwa in West Africa from 2018, packing our bags. Very different systems. Phil does tend to like his ready brick in his prepared meals. And another key point is, will your bags, transition bags, be left out in the rain? So I think in one race, I remember the race director had clearly made it in advance of the race where the bags would be left in the rain, and therefore the bags would have to be waterproof. And not everybody acknowledged that, I think, and they left the bags out and the kit got wet, and there's nothing worse than putting a wet kit. So something to bear in mind. And this is the team from Namakwa back in 2018, finishing that race. We were delighted to get to the finish, to be honest, because we had a major mechanical fairly early in the race, which lost us 7 hours. But we managed to clamber back from where we went down to 35th position, and we managed to climb back up to, I think it was 7th or 6th position in the end. So we thought that was a massive win for us. Okay, I am now going to welcome any questions that you may have.
Superb, thanks, Gary. If folks do have, that's been really good. I've learned some stuff there, but I'm nothing. As I said, I've got nothing like the kind of experience that you've got, and I've been making notes. There's one more race left in me. So while folks have a chance just to kind of ask questions, if you can put them into the chat function, you should see the button for that on the bottom. I got just a quickie question that we'll ask while folks have hopefully get a chance to do that. Do you have a favourite bit of kit? Is there a piece of kit that is the first into the bag that always goes on a race with you? I mean, I suspect it kind of perhaps changes leg to leg, but have you got like favourite bits of kit and why?
Arm warmers. I just think arm warmers are really versatile. And I hadn't really used them for running, for example, until I went to live in Canada in 2009 and 10, and then everybody's wearing them for running. It was just because I always used to wear long sleeve t-shirts, and I always used to suffer from getting too hot, and then just wearing a short sleeve technical tee and arm warmers is just so versatile. So they're always a first in the bag.
Superb. There you go. It's the simple stuff that matters, isn't it? You know, when you're needing the comfort and the convenience and the performance, it's not the fancy full size bike, it's the arm warmers. Chris is asking, Gary, if you can talk about the importance of good bike packing and how they're moved, i.e. not always upright. I think this is probably a reference to packing bike boxes, I think, Chris, isn't it?
Yeah.
Chris is our logistics master at ITERA, and therefore deals with everybody's bikes on a number of occasions. So this is really important stuff.
I think, if I'm not wrong, it says in the ARWS mandatory kit list that the bike boxes must be of a specific size. I think 140 by 80 by 30, but don't quote me on that. And also be able to be carried easily. I think there's words that affect in there somewhere, I think. I think what Chris is referring to is some teams tend to use bungee cords, for example, to tie down their lids. And the problem with that is if the catches go, it's going to damage someone somehow. So generally, don't use bungee cords. Use like paddle straps, for example. They're far better, like I had in my pictures. And also provide a means of carrying the box. So I've got handle at each end, and also a handle one on each side to enable one person to carry it.
Superb. And yeah, I think also that, you know, bike boxes, we're not always going to be shipping them from transition to transition in that kind of, in the format that you're showing there on the screen. That sometimes, just because of the way the logistics work, they're actually kind of stacked up on sides. Just bear that in mind when you're packing your bike.
Yep.
your bike box, that they won't necessarily be kind of kept in that vertical alignment. David asked a question about the race logistics planner that you referred to, Gary. How far in advance of the race do you get that? Not very is the answer, because we know that if we kind of produce that kind of, a couple of weeks out, people will geek it and try and second guess what the course is. So that is only supplied to you at the same time as we do the course reveal, which is about 24 hours before the race starts, something like that. So you will, the course reveal is where you'll, certainly at ITERA, that's where you'll see that logistics planner. So you've still got all of that time to get prepped. A point that James usually makes at this kind of juncture is that one of the kind of the failures he's seen, or one of the issues he's seen, and it's particularly kind of a new teams thing, is that people, once they get these logistics planners and the course maps, they basically stay up all night and try and kind of work out what's going on and do all the planning and end up absolutely knackered, before we've even started. Meanwhile, the experienced teams have done the prep before they even arrive. So it's a question of kind of dropping bags, pre-packed kind of dry bags, as Gary was referring to, into piles. So the logistics planner, yes, it's important, but actually quite a lot of the work's already been done. And it's the more experienced teams that you'll find in the restaurant carbo loading on the night before, and the less experienced teams who are generally the ones that are still kind of, getting themselves into a righteous frenzy and exhausting themselves before they even make it to the start line, which is
just on that, I think it's reasonable to assume that there's going to be at least 2 running legs, 2 biking legs, 2 kayaking legs, and you can pack accordingly for those. But you wouldn't know what the distances might be, so you can pre-prep those and then have a spare leftover bit of kit for whatever else that might be put in. I have no idea what's in the next ITERA, but from having done many races all over the world, you're likely to have 2 legs in each discipline.
I'm not being drawn on that. Nice try, though.
I'm not expecting you to. but you can pack 6 dry bags in advance.
Exactly. So 2 questions here from Colin and Andre that are quite similar and relate to the paddling section. And essentially, how do you carry food and drink on the go during the paddling sections? Keep it dry, keep it accessible. How do you do that?
Yeah. So early days, I didn't bother carrying it on me or carrying hydration on me. It was literally, I would reach for the bag and get it out when I needed to. But then you had to stop paddling to do that. Then I bought a PFD with massive kind of storage at the front with a hydration pack at the back. But I've changed recently to a more minimalist PFD where it's got some ability to store some food and a decent hydration pack on the back of about, I think it's about 2 litre capacity in the back. So generally, if you're paddling, put some form of energy in the water as well, if your stomach can take it. So in the past, I didn't take any energy in the water. I literally put electrolytes in there and relied on the food consumed for energy. But on paddling legs, I will generally put some form of energy powder in the water as well. And I think what we've learned now, team, is whilst it's all very well trying to paddle whilst all the time, so one person stops, one person eats, you feel obliged to eat quickly or not at all, and you forget to eat. So sometimes it's better to stop for 2 minutes, eat properly, and make sure everybody eats properly, and then go again.
Excellent, thanks, Gary. It's kind of there is a finite limit on how much kit that we will move for you during the race, as well as the organisers. As it is, you can imagine with the number of people and the number of boxes, bags that we're talking about, it's quite the job already. So it's not a free for all. There are limits on those, both in the sizes and the weights of the bike box and the bags that we'll carry for you. So there's a bit of planning. It's not just a question of emptying your wardrobe. Any more questions? There you go, Chris. It's a huge job to move the kit. It's actually probably the biggest job we have during race week, is working out the logistics of how we're going to get all of your kit from transition to transition and in time, that it's there waiting for you when you arrive. That's a job that gets even harder as we get further down the race, when there's a significant kind of amount of time between leading teams and kind of teams towards the back end of the pack. And actually, there's a point late on down the line, as Chris, I'm sure, will confirm, that, you know, we're pretty stretched, and we're often running, you know, 3 or 4 transition areas at the same time, and moving kit becomes a bit tricky. But we've never yet, as I think James said on the last session, we've never yet not had a bag in position, and that's testament to the amazing work that our kind of baggage handling teams do. Any more questions? We'll just do a last whiz round. Oh, that's a great question. Not necessarily. Oh, we'll do the equipment one first, and we'll finish on James's question, because that's a cracker. So we're being asked here, do you use rechargeable head torches? How do you deal with kind of having that much light for the duration of a race?
So I'll speak from experience here. In Godzone 2016, 1 or 2 members carried only rechargeable torches. And because we were out on the hill longer than expected, the battery basically ran out, and there was no means of putting batteries in. So lesson learned, only carry head torches where you can replace the power with your AAAs, your AAs. So
apply. Sorry, Gary, carry on.
Some rechargeable head torches have a thing at the back, which is your rechargeables. But if that does run out, then you do have a last resort of taking that out and putting AAs or AAAs back in. If you want to go down the rechargeable route, I generally don't. I generally use just replacement AAAs or AAs.
And is it a similar story with bike lights? I mean, how do you get through a 5-day race on a set of bike lights?
So bike lights wise, so I've got the exposure kind of cable-free design types. So I will generally have 2 handlebar mounted, you know, quite bright ones, and then also a joystick on my head as well. So there, and depending on what the race format might be, if it's a 4-day, I probably wouldn't need any more. But for example, Costa Rica 2013 and Godzone 2016, you know, the day length is quite short. It's about 12 hours of darkness, and because of the race length, you might think you're going to be out in the dark on the bike for 3, 4, 5 nights. So I then took more lights and also the piggyback rechargeables. And the good thing about them is you can plug them into your bike box whilst you go and do your trekking leg and come back, and then your main light will be charged, or you can plug the piggyback in and strap it to your light and it'll charge it whilst in operation. And they're quite robust from experience.
Excellent. That gets you through the length of a race. Okay, so unless there's anything else, oh, here we go. Yeah, so we're going to do biggest mid-race fallout. I've not had many. Gary, you may well have had some, but the one that springs to mind for me there was, it was one of those things, and you go in the cold light day, what on earth was that all about? We refused. You know, three of our members of our teams didn't want to stop at a chip shop in Pitlochry. One member did, and that caused a 24-hour sulk. And it's just so trivial. Have you kind of had to deal with fallouts? What's the most spectacular?
Oh, we've had major explosions. I'm not going to name the race. I'm not going to name any individuals. But basically, in one race in an overseas country, the navigation was particularly tricky because we were unfamiliar with the maps. The contour intervals were different to the UK. What looked flat on the map definitely wasn't flat on the ground because they had 20-meter contours. And yes, an error or two was made. And then one person in particular decided they wanted to take over navigation, even though they were the least capable or skilled at that time. And that caused uproar. And it put a bit of a dampener on the team spirit over the next probably day and a half. Yeah, that was the biggest spat I think we've had.
It's hard, isn't it? Because there's no option but to manage that and patch things up as best you can. What else are you going to do?
Yeah. I think so. For anybody who's not a navigator, please give the navigator. And I've actually decided to step back from navigation because I know I do make mistakes when I'm generally tired, whereas others in the team are far better at navigating when they're tired. And I forget to eat and drink when I'm navigating because I'm so focused. So I then generally deteriorate quite quickly. So for those that don't nav, you should assume that mistakes are made. Don't question them all the time. Give them their own space. And if you feel the need to be informed once in a while, just tell them, well, like, I like to be involved. Just let me know what's coming up. Is it a 50-kilometer trek? Just keep informed that way. But don't ask every 5 minutes, are we nearly there yet? That really irritates people. And it just actually puts them off their concentration. They're more likely to make mistakes. And then another way to work with navigators is have a role. So for example, you could be the person that counts steps or estimates distance by time, or you're the one with the altimeter. There's a way of helping the nav.
Fantastic. On the plus side, it's not all doom and gloom. There are some incredible experiences to be had. So let's finish on a happy note. And again, it can be the simple things. I recall during the ITERA in Wales, arriving onto the crest of the Brecon Beacons, right on the top of the kind of the Corrie Rim there at dawn, and just having this, incredible euphoric moment of another day dawning. And here I was in this amazing place, with these people and all of the stuff that we were going through. And I just had this incredible time. I got the hairs rising on the back of my neck right now. And it was just amazing. And adventure racing is much more about the amazing stuff. But yeah, occasionally it goes a bit wrong and you fall out with folks. So I think, given that is bang on 8:30, that's brilliantly timed, Gary. I wouldn't expect anything else from you. I just want to say a huge thank you to you for leading on this session. I think that's been really informative and really useful, and really appreciate your time. So thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for attending. We hope you got something out of that. There will be at least 2 more sessions are planned in this series. One will focus on food and nutrition, and one will focus on what it's actually like, particularly from a kind of a newbie perspective, what it's like to take part in your first adventure race, your first expedition adventure race. So watch for the details and the dates of those sessions coming up. But in the meantime, thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you in a few weeks' time. Thank you.